Evelyn Carter dropped to her knees in the dust, her wedding ring pressed hard against the splintered porch step as she begged, "Please, mister, I ain't got nowhere else to go." 15 cowboys stood watching. Not one moved. The foreman, Jack Turner, looked her dead in the eye and gave her the words that would change everything. "You got 1 week, ma'am. Feed these men right, or you're gone." No softness, no second chances. Just survival. A woman who once lived comfortably now stood at the edge of ruin, forced to prove her worth in a world that didn't believe in her. If you're watching from anywhere across America, drop a comment below and tell me what city or town you're tuning in from. I want to see how far Evelyn's story has traveled. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and stay with me till the very last word, because what this widow does next will leave you breathless. Evelyn stayed kneeling. The cowboys hadn't moved. The foreman hadn't softened. "You hear me, ma'am?" Jack Turner asked again, his voice low and even. 1 week. She lifted her chin. "I heard you." "Then get up off that porch." She rose, slow, knees stiff, a hand braced against the post. The ring on her finger caught the afternoon light, and she closed her fist over it like she meant to hide it. "Boots off at the door," Jack said. "Kitchen's through the breezeway. Cook stove's been cold a month. You'll be wanting to fire it before supper." "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir." "What do I call you then?" "Jack'll do." A tall man near the corral spat into the dirt. "She gonna last past Tuesday, Jack." "That ain't your concern, Murphy." "Reckon it is when I'm the one eatin' her cookin'." Jack didn't turn his head. "You'll eat what's set in front of you, same as you always have. Now get them mares watered before I lose my patience." Murphy spat again, but he moved. Jack tipped his hat back an inch and looked at Evelyn proper for the first time. "Ma'am, you got anything besides what's on your back?" A satchel, by the gate. "Boy," Jack called, and a thin ranch hand, maybe 17, broke from the group. "Fetch the lady's bag, and don't dawdle." "Yes, Jack." The boy ran. Evelyn watched him go, and then made herself look at Jack again. "I'm obliged." "Don't be obliged, ma'am. Be useful." He stepped to the side and gestured at the door. Inside. She crossed the threshold, and the smell hit her stale, grease-old smoke, the particular sourness of a kitchen that hadn't seen a scrub brush in a season. Jack didn't follow her in. He stayed framed in the doorway. "Pantry's behind the curtain. Flowers in the tin, what there is of it. Smokehouse out back's got bacon and a side of beef hung yesterday. Eggs in the coop if the hens ain't gone broody. You'll find what you need, or you'll make do." "How many men?" 15, plus me. 16 plates then. 3 meals a day. Coffee at 4 in the morning, breakfast at 5. Dinner at noon. Supper at 6 sharp. Late and they'll eat you alive, ma'am, and I won't stop 'em. I won't be late. We'll see." The boy came in with her satchel and set it just inside the door, then bolted like he didn't want to be in the room when Jack started in again. Jack pulled his hat off, ran a hand through dark hair shot with road dust. "One more thing. I run this ranch for Mr. Whitaker. He don't live here. He don't ride here. He shows up twice a year to look at the books and shake hands with men that matter. He don't care about cooks. He don't care about you. The week ain't his rule, ma'am. It's mine. You feed these men right, you stay. You burn 1 meal, you sour 1 batch of beans, you turn out coffee that tastes like creek water, you walk back the way you came. I don't have time for charity, and I don't have a soft heart for it. Are we clear?" "We're clear." "Then I'll leave you to it." He set his hat back and was gone. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and let the quiet hold her up. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her apron and waited until they stopped, and then she turned in a slow circle and took stock of what she had to work with. A cast-iron Charter oak with a firebox caked in old ash. A flour tin and a sugar tin and a lard pail with the lid askew. A row of cracked plates leaning against the back of the dry sink. 2 pots. A skillet the size of a wagon wheel. She put a hand to the small of her back and bent to open the firebox. "All right, Mr. Carter," she said softly to a husband 3 months in the ground. All right, we'll start with a fire. He had told her once, lying beside her in the bed they'd shared in St. Louis, that a woman who could feed men could survive anything. She'd laughed at him then. She had been 26. They'd had a bohemian cook named Mrs. Krause, who came in 3 days a week. Her husband had been a dry goods man with a good name on 3 blocks of Olive Street. The fire took on the third try. By the time the stove was hot enough to spit on, the sun was tilting hard toward the ridge, and she had 4 hours till supper. She set the beans to soak. She browned salt pork in the great skillet and rendered the fat off and saved it for the morning's biscuits. She cut the beef into a stew and put it on with onions and the last of the dried sage from the rafter bunch. She mixed cornbread by feel because she didn't have measuring cups, and she slid 2 great rounds of it into the oven. A shadow filled the kitchen doorway. She didn't look up. "Smells better in here than it has in a month." She knew the voice. She kept her hand near the oven. "Mr. Turner." "Jack." "Jack?" "Murphy says you ain't gonna last past Tuesday." "Murphy doesn't know me." "Murphy don't know much." She let herself look. He was leaning on the doorframe, hat in his hand, the dust on his shoulders thicker than it had been an hour ago. He had been somewhere on horseback and had come back to check on her. She filed that away. "I'll have supper on the table at 6. "I don't doubt it. I came to tell you the wells froze, the pump handle been like that since Sunday. You want water, you draw it from the trough out back. Strain it through the cheesecloth on the nail there." "Strain it? There's grit in it some days." "All right. And the hens are laying poor. You'll get 6 eggs maybe. Don't plan on more." "I wasn't." He nodded once. He didn't leave. "Was there something else?" "You ever cook for this many men, ma'am?" She thought about lying. She thought about how a lie would taste in her mouth and how it would taste in his when he found her out, and she set the spoon down on the rim of the pot. "No. I've cooked for my husband, and I've watched my mother cook for a boarding house when I was a girl. I haven't put supper on a table for 15 men in my life." "You told me you could." "I told you I would." He looked at her a long moment. Something moved in his face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't anything she could name. "That's a different sentence, ma'am." "Yes." "Don't call me sir." "I didn't, Jack." He almost laughed. He didn't quite. "You got till 6. Don't make a liar out of yourself, Mrs. Carter." "I won't." He was gone again. She stood with the spoon in her hand and felt the breath go out of her so hard she had to sit on the stool by the woodbox. She had told the truth, and he had not thrown her off the place. He had set the rule a second time gentler and walked out. That was something. That was a small, narrow thing she could stand on. She got back up. At 6 o'clock, she rang the iron triangle on the porch the way the boy had shown her, and the men came in from the corral and the barn and the long shed where they'd been oiling tack. They stamped the dust off their boots and hung their hats on the row of nails by the door, and they sat without ceremony at the long table and waited. She brought the stew in a great chipped tureen and set it down at Jack's elbow because she didn't know who else mattered. She brought the cornbread on a board. She brought a tin of butter and a pitcher of buttermilk and a bowl of pickled cucumbers she'd found in the spring house and prayed weren't turned. She set a coffee pot at the far end where she'd seen Murphy sit, and a second one near Jack, and stepped back against the wall and folded her hands in her apron. Nobody said grace. Nobody said anything. Murphy reached for the cornbread and tore off a piece and dragged it through the gravy and put it in his mouth, and he chewed without expression, and he didn't look at her. The thin boy who had carried her bag took a bite of stew, and his eyes widened. He took another. "It's hot," somebody said down the table, a man with a long mustache and a scar across his knuckle. "It's stew," Murphy said. "It's hot stew." "Eat it or don't, McKinney." McKinney ate it. They all ate. They ate fast, and they ate steady, and the tureen emptied. She went back to the kitchen and brought the second pot she'd had, the foresight to keep warm, on the back of the stove, and she ladled it out, and they ate that too. Jack hadn't taken a bite. She watched him from the wall. He had his hands flat on either side of his bowl, and he was waiting for the men to settle the way a man at the head of a table waits when he means to say something. Murphy noticed and slowed. The others noticed and slowed with him. The room got quieter than it had any right to be. "Boys," 15 pairs of eyes came to him. "Mrs. Carter is the new cook." "We know that, Jack." "Shut up, Murphy. Mrs. Carter is the new cook, and she'll be cooking breakfast at 5 tomorrow morning, and dinner at noon, and supper at 6, and every day after for the rest of the week. At the end of that week, I'll decide if she stays. Until I decide, you treat her like you'd treat your own mother. You hear me?" Silence. "I said you hear me." "Yes, Jack." That was Cal. "Murphy." Murphy looked up slow. "I hear you, Jack." "Good." Jack picked up his spoon. He took a bite of the stew. He chewed. He swallowed. He took another bite. He didn't say anything about it, didn't make a face one way or the other, and that was somehow worse than if he'd cussed her or praised her. He just ate. The men watched him eat the first 3 spoonfuls, and then they went back to their own bowls, and the room filled up with the soft clink of tin on tin. She went back to the kitchen. She put her hands in the wash water that had gone tepid hours ago, and she pressed her palms flat against the bottom of the basin, and she breathed. She didn't sleep. They had given her the small room off the kitchen 8 feet by 10 with a rope bed and a washstand and a window that looked out onto the corral. She lay on the bed in her clothes because she didn't trust the bed, and she didn't trust herself to wake if she got too comfortable, and she watched the moon move across the window glass, and she thought about her husband dead of typhoid in a back bedroom of a house she didn't own anymore, and about the lawyer in St. Louis who had told her the debts were so large she would walk out with nothing, and about the cousin in Bozeman who had written 6 months ago saying, "Come on out, there's good country here," and about the stagecoach that had broken an axle 2 days short of Bozeman and put her down at a rail siding she couldn't even spell, and about the wagoneer who had pointed at the mountains and said there's a ranch up there might take you on if you can cook, and about the long walk in. 3 months a widow. 3 months and 4 days. She slept maybe an hour. The stars hadn't quite gone when she got up and dressed and went into the kitchen and laid the fire. Cal was the first one in at 4. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands like a boy at his grandmother's parlor. "Mornin', Mrs. Carter?" "Mornin', Cal. Coffee's almost on." "Yes, ma'am." "Sit down." "Ma'am." "Sit down at the table. I'll bring it to you." He sat. He looked like he didn't know what to do with his hands. She poured him a tin cup of coffee that was strong enough to walk on its own and set it in front of him. "Sugar." "No, ma'am. Just like this is good." "All right." "Mrs. Carter." "Yes, Cal." "You set out plates last night for 16, and there's only 15 of us not countin' Jack. I didn't say nothin' on account of I didn't want to embarrass you in front of the men." She paused with the coffee pot in her hand. "Who's the 16th, Cal?" "There ain't a 16th. Jack told you 15 plus him. 16 total." "That's what he said." "That's what he said." Cal got a strange look. "Ma'am, there's only 14 ranch hands and Jack, 15 total. There's been 14 of us since old Hardy got kicked by a mule and went home to his sister in Helena last Christmas. Jack ain't replaced him." "I see. He told you 15 plus him." "He did." Cal set his coffee down. "Ma'am, I oughtn't say." "Then don't, Cal." "It's only Hardy was the cook before he got kicked. After he left, the men took turns. We've been eating bad for 10 months. Jack's been advertising for a cook in 3 towns, and nobody comes up here on account of we're 40 miles from a real road. Jack told you 16, 'cause he meant for there to be 16. Ma'am?" She set the coffee pot down on the back of the stove. "Cal." "Ma'am?" "Drink your coffee." "Yes, ma'am." She turned back to the stove and put her hand on the warming shelf and let the heat go through her palm and up her arm. He had counted her in. He had set her at the table before she had earned it. He had given her 1 week to fail, and he had also, without a single soft word, he had also given her a place. She took the biscuits out of the oven. She turned the bacon. She cracked 5 of the 6 eggs the hens had given her, and she beat them with a fork, and she let the fat in the skillet come hot enough to hiss when the eggs hit it, and the men started coming in. Hat in hand, 1 and 2 at a time, and by 5 o'clock she had 16 plates on the table and 15 men sitting at it. The empty place at the foot of the table was where Hardy used to sit. Jack came in last and saw the empty place, and he didn't say a word about it. He took his seat. He looked down the long table at her standing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder, and he tipped his head no more than half an inch. "Mrs. Carter." "Jack?" "Sit down and eat with us." She didn't move. "Sir?" "Don't call me sir." "Jack, sit down. There's a plate. Use it." The men were watching her. Murphy was watching her hardest, his fork halfway to his mouth, his jaw working on something he wasn't going to say. She crossed the eating room slow, and she pulled out the chair at the foot of the table. Hardy's chair. The 16th chair, the chair that had been empty for 10 months, and she sat down. Jack picked up the platter of biscuits and passed it down without ceremony. McKinney passed it on. Cal passed it on. The biscuits came around the table and landed at her elbow, and she took one, and she set it on her plate, and she looked at Jack. He looked back at her. He said, "Eat, ma'am." And she did. Murphy set his fork down with a click that was loud in the room. He wiped his mouth on the back of his hand. He looked at her across the long stretch of mismatched tin and crockery and biscuit crumbs, and his eyes were the cold gray of river ice in February. "You sittin' in Hardy's chair, ma'am." "Murphy, I'm askin' her Jack. And I'm tellin' you to keep eatin'. That's Hardy's chair. Hardy ain't here. That's Hardy's chair, Jack." The room went still. Cal's hand was halfway to the buttermilk pitcher. McKinney's spoon hung above his bowl. Even the rooster outside the window seemed to have given up. Evelyn set her biscuit down on her plate. She folded her hands in her lap. She made her voice the way her mother had taught her to make her voice when men in the boarding house got loud after payday, level low, no apology in it. "Mr. Murphy?" "Ma'am." "I'll sit where the foreman tells me to sit. And I'll cook what the foreman tells me to cook. And I'll go when the foreman tells me to go. If you've got a complaint about any of those 3 things, you take it up with the foreman. Don't take it up with me at this table while these men are trying to eat." Murphy's jaw worked. Jack didn't move. He didn't look at Murphy. He didn't look at Evelyn. He picked up his coffee and took a long swallow and set it down. "She said it about right, Murphy. Jack, eat your breakfast." Murphy ate his breakfast. Nobody spoke again until the plates were empty. The men got up 1 and 2 at a time and put their hats back on and went out into the yard. Cal nodded to her on the way past and didn't quite meet her eye. McKinney tipped his hat. Murphy went out without looking at anybody. Jack was the last one at the table. He stood up. He put his hands on the back of his chair. He looked down the table at her still sitting in Hardy's place with her biscuit half-eaten on her plate. "Mrs. Carter." "Jack. That was good biscuits. Thank you. 6 days. I know. Don't sour on me." "I won't." He set his hat back on. He went out. The screen door slapped shut behind him, and she sat alone at the long table with 15 empty plates and 1 half-eaten biscuit, and she put both her hands flat on the wood, and she felt the grain of it under her palms, and she did not let herself cry. 6 days. She got up and started to clear. She cleared 16 plates and stacked them in the basin and got the water on for washing, and by the time she turned around, Cal was back in the doorway with his hat in his hands. "Ma'am?" "Cal. You want help with them dishes? You got work." "I got 15 minutes before I got work." "Then sit down and have another cup of coffee." "Cal, and let me work." "Yes, ma'am." He sat. He drank. He didn't look at her, and she liked him better for it. "Cal?" "Ma'am?" "Tell me about Murphy." Cal turned the tin cup in his hands. "Murphy's been here longer'n any of us except Jack. He come up from Texas in '68 with a bullet still in his shoulder and a story he won't tell. He don't like change." "Am I change?" "Ma'am, you're the biggest change this ranch has had since the railroad surveyors come through and turned around at the river." "Wonderful." He'll come around or he won't. I wouldn't bet money either way. I'm not a betting woman, Cal. No, ma'am. I didn't reckon you was. He drained his cup, set it down, and was gone before she could thank him. She had dinner on the table at noon sharp, a beef pot pie stretched across 2 pans because she'd found a bag of dried apples in the pantry and made a pie from them too, and the men ate it without talking and went back out, and Murphy passed her on the porch and said nothing, and that was almost worse than if he'd said something. Jack hung back. He always hung back now. She noticed that. Mrs. Carter? Jack, you found the apples. In a stone crock behind the lard. Hardy put 'em up before he left. They're good apples. He was a good cook. I gathered. He set his hat back on. 5 days. I know. He went out. She had supper laid by 5:30 and was scrubbing the long table when she heard the shouting. She thought at first it was the men coming in early, and then she thought it was a fight in the corral. And then she heard Cal's voice cracking high, the way a boy's voice cracks when he's seen something he wishes he hadn't. Mrs. Carter. Mrs. Carter, come quick. She dropped the rag. Cal, what is it? It's McKinney, ma'am. The colt come down on his arm. It's bad. It's real bad. Jack said fetch you. Jack said fetch me. Yes, ma'am. He said, fetch the lady. He said run. She didn't ask why. She grabbed the kettle off the stove and the clean linen sack off the nail by the door, and a paring knife from the block, and her shawl off the hook, because she was a woman who, when she moved fast, still grabbed her shawl and she ran. McKinney was on the ground inside the corral, with 3 men around him, and the colt held off at the far rail by a 4th, and the sound coming out of him was a sound she had heard before in a back room on Olive Street, when her father had set a teamster's leg without enough whiskey in him to soften it. Move, she said. Murphy was kneeling at McKinney's head. He didn't move. Mr. Murphy, move. Ma'am, this ain't. Move or hold his shoulders down, but pick one in the next breath. He moved. He held the shoulders down. She knelt in the dirt. McKinney's right arm was bent the wrong way below the elbow, and the bone had come through the skin in a place she did not want to look at twice, and there was bright blood, the kind of blood that means an artery has been nicked and not severed, and she put her hand flat on his chest first, because that was what her father had always done before he did anything else. McKinney. Ma'am. Oh God, ma'am. Look at me. Look at my face. Ma'am, look at my face, Mr. McKinney. What's your Christian name? It's Tom, ma'am. It's Tom. Tom, I'm going to set this. It's going to hurt worse than it hurts now for about as long as it takes a man to count to 10. Then it's going to hurt less. Do you understand me, ma'am? Do you understand me, Tom McKinney? Yes, ma'am. Murphy, hold him. I'm holding him. Cal, get behind me. When I tell you to pull, you take that wrist and you pull straight, not up, not down, straight away from his shoulder, until I tell you stop. You listening? Yes, ma'am. Jack? I'm here. She hadn't seen him come into the corral. He was on one knee at her elbow, hat off his hand near McKinney's good shoulder. I need a clean blade and clean water, and I need that linen torn into strips about 2 fingers wide, and I need somebody to fire the iron in the smithy hot, but not white, and I need it now. Boy, Jack said without looking away from her. Go fire the iron. McKinney, you hold still for the lady. Cal, do what she says. Murphy, don't you let go of them shoulders till she tells you. Jack? Murphy started. Don't, Murphy. Jack, she ain't a... I said don't. Murphy didn't. She took the paring knife and she cut McKinney's sleeve open from cuff to shoulder in one long pull, and she didn't flinch at what she saw underneath. And 3 men who had been watching her for 2 days saw her not flinch, and something in the corral changed. Tom, I'm going to push the bone back where it belongs, and Cal is going to pull on your wrist while I do it. You're going to count for me, out loud, from 1 to 10. Don't stop counting till I tell you. Ma'am. Count Tom. 1. Cal, pull. Steady. Don't jerk. 2, 3. Oh God, ma'am. Oh God. Keep counting. 4, 5. She had her thumbs under the broken edge of bone, and she pressed, and she felt it slide, and she felt it catch, and she felt it find its seat, and McKinney made a sound that was not a word, and she did not stop pressing. 6, 7. Cal, ease off. Slow, slower. 8, 9. Stop pulling, Cal. Hold him there. 10, ma'am. 10. Good, Tom. That's the worst of it. Murphy, keep him down. He's going to want to come up off the ground in about 10 seconds and you can't let him. I got him. She tore the linen with her teeth where her hands were too slick to manage it, and she packed the wound, and she bound the arm to a piece of corral rail Cal had broken off without being asked, and she tied it tight enough to hold and loose enough to live, and she sat back on her heels and looked at her hands and then at Jack. The iron? Boy's bringing it. It's for the bleeder under the bone. I can feel it pulsing under my thumb. If I don't burn it, he'll bleed out by sundown, and if I burn it wrong, he'll lose the arm by Sunday. I need to know if you trust me to do it. Jack looked at her. He looked a long time. Mrs. Carter, I don't know your first name. Evelyn? Evelyn? Yes. You done this before. My father was a surgeon in St. Louis. I assisted him from the time I was 12 years old until I married. I have done this before, not often. Enough. Murphy's head came up. Your father was what, Murphy? Jack. Murphy, you keep them shoulders down or I will put you on the ground myself. The boy came running with the iron wrapped in a wet rag at the handle, and the working end was the dull red of a sunset before a storm, and he held it out to her at arm's length, and his hand was shaking. Steady, son, she said. Yes, ma'am. Set it on the rail there, point up. Don't drop it. Yes, ma'am. Tom. Ma'am. This is the bad part. I know, ma'am. Bite down on this. She wadded a strip of linen and pushed it between his teeth. Murphy, both shoulders. Cal, both knees. Jack. Yes. His good hand. Hold it. Let him crush yours if he needs to. All right. She took the iron. She set it where she had to set it. McKinney bucked once, a great heaving arch of his whole body, and Murphy took the weight of it across his chest and held him down, and Cal lay across his legs, and Jack let McKinney's left hand close on his and did not pull away. The smell came up that always comes up, and Evelyn breathed through her mouth and counted to 4 under her breath and lifted the iron away and dropped it in the dirt. That's all, Tom. That's all. McKinney was crying. He was a grown man with a scar across his knuckle and a mustache the color of wet hay, and he was crying, and not one man in that corral looked at him for it. He's going to faint in about a minute, she said, and that's a mercy. Carry him to the bunkhouse. Lay him on his back. Don't let him roll. I'll come dress it proper inside an hour. Yes, ma'am, Cal said. Jack didn't say anything. He was looking at her hands. She looked down at them. They were red to the wrists. Jack? Evelyn. I need to wash. There's water on the porch. All right. She stood up. She felt the corral tilt, and she set her feet, and it stopped tilting. Murphy was still kneeling in the dirt looking up at her, and his face was a face she didn't know how to read. Mr. Murphy. Ma'am. Thank you for holding him. Murphy opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. Yes, ma'am. She walked out of the corral. She made it to the porch before her knees went, and she sat down hard on the top step and put her head between them and breathed. And after a minute, she heard boots on the boards, and she didn't look up. Don't fuss over me, Jack. I wasn't gonna fuss. Good. He sat down on the step next to her. Not close. Close enough. Surgeon's daughter. Yes. In St. Louis. Olive Street. He had a practice there for 31 years. He died the spring before I married. And your husband? A dry goods merchant, 3 months in the ground. Ma'am. Jack. Why didn't you say? She lifted her head. Why didn't I say what, Jack? That my father cut men open for a living, and that I knew how to set a bone when yesterday on the porch, when you told me 1 week or out, Last night at the supper table where Murphy was hoping I'd choke on my own gravy. This morning in Hardy's chair? When was I supposed to tell you, Jack, and what good would it have done me if I had? He was quiet. You hired a cook. I came to be a cook. I wasn't going to stand on your porch and tell you I had hands that knew their way around a bone saw, because a woman with hands like that scares men. Jack and I needed you not scared. I needed you to let me through the door. Evelyn, don't. All right. Just don't. All right. She put her head back down. He sat next to her. He didn't speak again. After a while, she heard him stand up and walk into the kitchen, and she heard the water pump out. Back creaked the way it had been creaking for 2 days, and she heard him come back out with a basin, and he set it on the step beside her and went back inside without saying anything else. She washed her hands. The water in the basin turned the color she had known it would. By the time she had supper on the table, she had been on her feet for 16 hours, and her back was a stripe of fire from the small of it to the top of her shoulders, and she rang the triangle, and the men came in, and they hung up their hats, and the seat at the foot of the table was empty, because McKinney was in the bunkhouse with morphine she'd pulled out of her own satchel, and Murphy stood by his chair and didn't sit down. Mr. Murphy? Ma'am. Sit, please. Your supper's getting cold. Ma'am. He didn't sit. Jack. Jack hadn't sat either. He was standing at the head of the table with his hat still in his hand, which he never did. The men were watching. Boys, Jack said. Nobody moved. Mrs. Carter saved Tom McKinney's arm this afternoon. She set the bone, and she stopped the bleeder, and she did the work that any of you that's been to a field hospital knows is the work that decides whether a man buries his right hand in a box next Tuesday or whether he uses it to lift a coffee cup in the morning. She did that work in the dirt of our corral with a paring knife from our kitchen and an iron from our smithy, and she did it because nobody else here knew how. I want every man at this table to understand that fact and not forget it. Silence. Murphy? Jack. Sit down. Murphy sat. And the next man at this table that gives Mrs. Carter a hard word or a hard look or a hard silence will answer to me in the yard. We clear. Yes, Jack. Cal. Yes, Jack. The boy. Yes, Jack. One after another around the table, every man saying it. Murphy last. Yes, Jack. Eat. They ate. Evelyn stood in the kitchen doorway with the dish towel over her shoulder, and she watched them eat, and she didn't sit down at Hardy's chair, and Jack noticed, and didn't call her over, and she was grateful for that, because if he had called her over, she would have cried in front of 15 men, and she would not forgive herself for it. She brought the apple pie in at the end. Murphy was the one who looked up first. Mrs. Carter? Mr. Murphy. He stood up. The men froze with their forks halfway. He stood and he walked the length of the table to where she was setting the pie down, and he took his hat off his head where he had not taken it off because he had forgotten, and he held it against his chest. Ma'am, I had words for you these past 2 days that wasn't fit for a Christian woman, and I held back from saying all of them, but I said enough. I'm asking your pardon. Mr. Murphy. I ain't done, ma'am. All right. My brother lost his leg at Antietam on account of nobody around him knew how to tie off a vein. He bled to death in a wagon outside Sharpsburg before they got him to a tent. I watched it. I was 16 years old, and I watched it. And when I saw you put your hands on McKinney this afternoon, ma'am, He stopped. He swallowed. I should have been holding his shoulders without you telling me twice. I'm sorry I made you tell me twice. Mr. Murphy, you held him fine. I held him after. You held him when it counted. He looked at her. His eyes were wet, and he didn't bother hiding it. I'd be obliged, ma'am, if you'd call me Hugh. All right, Hugh. And I'd be obliged if you'd cut me a piece of that pie. I'd be honored to. He went back to his seat. He sat down. He waited for his pie like a man who had not been certain 2 minutes ago that he was going to be served any. She cut the pie. She served Hugh first because she understood what he had done by walking the length of that table, and she served Jack second because he was the foreman, And then she went down the line and gave a piece to every man, and the boy got the biggest piece because he had run for the iron without asking why, and Cal got the second biggest because he had pulled on McKinney's wrist without flinching. And by the time she got to her own seat, the dish was empty, and there was no piece left for her, and she did not say anything about it, and she sat down at Hardy's chair. Jack pushed his plate toward her without looking up. "Eat half of mine, Evelyn." "Jack, I ain't askin'." She ate half of his pie. Hugh Murphy watched her eat it, and he nodded once slow, like a man confirming something to himself, and he went back to his coffee. Outside, the light had gone. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, Tom McKinney was sleeping, a sleep that would not have come without her, and somewhere up on the ridge, a coyote was working out the long question. Coyotes work out at sundown, and inside the long room, 15 men and 1 woman ate apple pie at a table that had been silent for 10 months and was not silent anymore. Jack set his coffee down. "Evelyn?" "Jack. 4 days." "I know. That number's going to mean something different now. I know that too." He looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the porch when she was kneeling in the dust, and he looked at her a different way too. A way he had not looked at her until this afternoon in the corral, and she saw both looks at once, and she didn't know what to do with either of them. So she picked up her coffee, and she drank it, and the men around her ate, and the night came down around the ranch house, and somewhere in the dark, Hugh Murphy was already thinking about how he would tell the story of a widow with a paring knife to anyone in 3 counties who would listen. The next morning, the talk in the bunkhouse was quieter than usual, and Cal told her later it was because Hugh Murphy had gone in there at sunup and put a stop to anything that wasn't civil before it started. "Hugh said what?" she asked. "He said the next man that runs his mouth about Mrs. Carter answers to him personal." "He didn't." "He did, ma'am." "And what did the men say to that?" "Not a word, ma'am. You don't say a word to Hugh Murphy when he's standing in his long johns with a look like that on his face." She laughed before she could stop herself. It was the first time she'd laughed since she'd come up the road. McKinney was sitting up by noon. The fever stayed off. She changed his dressings twice, and the second time he caught her wrist with his good hand. "Mrs. Carter." "Tom. My ma was a midwife in Tennessee. She lost 3 out of 4 to childbed fever the year I was 12. She'd have given her teeth for hands like yours." "Tom, you don't have to—" "I ain't done. If you ever need something from me, ma'am, in this life or in any other, you say the word and you got it. You hear?" "I hear." "Don't you forget." "I won't, Tom." She didn't tell Jack. She didn't have to. Cal told him by supper time, and Jack came into the kitchen while she was rolling out pie crust and stood at the dry sink and didn't say anything for a long minute. "Jack." "Evelyn." "Did you need something?" 3 days. 3 days. "Mrs. Carter." "Yes." "You ain't going nowhere on Sunday." She set the rolling pin down. She pressed her hands flat to the table. "Is that you telling me, Jack? Or is that you asking me?" He turned. He looked at her over the dry sink, and there was the look from the corral again, only steadier now, only longer. "It's me telling you that you ain't going. Whether you stay, that's me asking." "Jack?" "You don't have to answer today. I'm not going." "Evelyn." "I'm not going, Jack." He nodded once. He set his hat back on. He went out. The screen door slapped shut, and she stood with flour on her hands and her heart going harder than it had any business going. By the 6th day, Cal was bringing her water without being asked. Hugh was splitting the kindling for the morning fire before he went out to the corrals. The boy, his name was Ezra. She'd finally pried it out of him, was standing in the kitchen doorway every evening waiting to carry the slop bucket out for her, and she had stopped telling him not to. She had been at Silver Creek 6 days when the wind changed. Hugh was the one who came in first. He stood in the doorway with rain in his hat brim, and his face the color a man's face goes when he has done arithmetic and didn't like the answer. "Mrs. Carter." "Hugh." "Storm's comin'." "How bad?" "Bad enough Jack's pullin' the men in from the South Range. We got maybe an hour." "What do you need from me?" Hot food, ma'am, and a lot of it. Men come in wet and cold, and there ain't no work after dark for the rest of tonight, nor most of tomorrow. They're gonna be ugly, and they're gonna be hungry, and they're gonna want coffee that'll strip the paint off a wagon. Tell Ezra to bring me every dry stick of wood in the pile. Tell Cal to fill every pot in the kitchen at the trough. Tell Jack I'll feed 30 if he brings me 30. Yes, ma'am. He was gone. The rain came in sideways 20 minutes later. The men came in not long after, soaked through and silent, and she had 4 pots of stew, 3 pans of cornbread, and coffee strong enough to walk on a cripple. She fed them in shifts because the table didn't seat them dry, and standing both. Jack came in last, water running off his hat brim, and she set a plate in front of him without a word. Evelyn, eat Jack. The east pasture fence is down. Eat Jack, and the bridge over the creek won't last till morning. Jack, Evelyn, you can't fix the bridge in this. Eat your supper. Then you can decide whether to die in the dark for a piece of timber. He stared at her. Hugh, halfway through his second bowl, snorted into his coffee. She ain't wrong, Jack. Murphy. She ain't Jack. Jack ate his supper. The wind hit hard at full dark. Something crashed out by the smithy that sounded like a barn door coming off its hinges, and Cal jumped up from his chair so fast his coffee went over. Cal, sit. Mrs. Carter, sit. If it's a door, it'll still be a door in the morning. If it's a horse, somebody else has already gone for it. You go out in this and break a leg, and I've got 2 men in the bunkhouse instead of 1. Cal sat. It was a horse. It was the bay mare from the near corral, and it was Ezra who went out for her because Ezra was 16 and didn't know better, and was out the door before anyone could grab his collar. He came back inside 20 minutes later, soaked to the bone with the mare's halter rope in his fist and a gash across his forehead from the corral rail. Ezra! Ma'am, I got her, ma'am, I got her. Sit down on that stool. Put your head back. Ma'am. Sit, Ezra. She cleaned the cut. She stitched it with thread from her own sewing kit and a needle she boiled in the kettle, and Ezra made a face like he was eating a lemon and didn't make a sound, and when she was done, she put her hand flat on the top of his wet head. You're a brave boy, Ezra. Yes, ma'am. And a stupid one. Yes, ma'am. Don't do it again. No, ma'am. The storm went on past midnight. She didn't sleep. She kept the stove going and the coffee hot, and twice in the night, men came stumbling in from the bunkhouse for a cup of something to warm them, and she gave it to them, and they tipped their hats and went back out into the rain. Jack didn't come in. Jack was somewhere out in the dark with 3 other men trying to keep the south fence from going entirely, and she didn't know where he was, and she didn't ask. It was near 3 in the morning when the kitchen door banged open, and Cal half-carried Jack across the threshold. Jack. He's all right, ma'am. He's all right. He just took a fence rail across the chest. Set him on the bench. Cal, get his shirt open. Hugh, get the lamp closer. Evelyn, I'm fine. Be quiet, Jack. She put her hands on his ribs. He flinched once and then held still. She felt along the bone, careful, slow, while he looked up at the kitchen ceiling and didn't look at her. 2 cracked, not broken through. You're going to be sore for a month and you're going to breathe shallow for a week. Cal, get me the linen. Evelyn. Quiet, Jack. Evelyn. What, Jack? Thank you. She didn't answer. She wrapped his ribs. Her hands were steady, and they had no business being steady, and when she was done, she stepped back from him and turned to the stove and put both her palms flat on the warming shelf. You're done for tonight, Jack. You sit on that bench till the rain stops. Yes, ma'am. Don't yes, ma'am me. Yes, Evelyn. The rain stopped at dawn. The men came in mud to the knees. The bridge had held. The east fence was a loss, but the cattle hadn't gotten through. 2 horses had cuts that needed tending, and 1 cow had calved early in the wet. And the calf was alive, which Hugh said was a sign from God, if a man believed in signs from God, which he didn't. Evelyn put breakfast on the table at 7:30. Jack came to it walking like a man with cracked ribs walks, and he sat down at the head, and the men ate, and nobody talked, because nobody had the breath left for talking. She had just sat down at Hardy's chair, when they heard the buggy. Cal looked up sharp. That ain't... It is, Hugh said. Today? Today. Jack set his fork down very carefully on the rim of his plate. Evelyn. Jack. That's Mr. Whitaker. All right. He don't usually come in spring. All right. Stay in the kitchen. Jack. Evelyn, please. She didn't answer. She got up. She went to the kitchen doorway and stood inside it where she could hear and not be seen, and she watched through the narrow gap between the door and the jamb. The buggy stopped at the porch. A man got down from it. He was tall and dressed in a brown wool suit that had not been wet in his entire life, and he had a watch chain across his vest and a flat brown hat in his hand, and a face like a man who had never once been told no by anybody who mattered. Turner. Mr. Whitaker. What's this I hear about a woman? Sir, a woman Turner, at my ranch, cooking for my men. I had a letter from the agent at the rail siding, and he said she'd come up the road 3 weeks ago. Yes, sir. On whose authority? Mine, sir. Yours? Yes, sir. Whitaker stepped up onto the porch. He did not take off his hat, though he was now under a roof. He did not nod to the men through the open doorway, though he could see them at the table. He looked past Jack into the dining room, and his eyes traveled over the men, and they came to rest on the empty seat beside Tom McKinney. Where's the cripple? Jack went still. Evelyn saw the back of his shoulders go still. Sir, the man with the busted arm, Murphy wrote me, said he wouldn't be working a roundup for 6 months. I came up to see what kind of man I'm paying to do nothing. Sir McKinney's in the bunkhouse. He'll be back to light work inside a fortnight. He'll be off my books inside a week. I don't pay men to mend. Sir. Don't sir me, Turner. Bring out the woman. Jack didn't move. I said bring her out. Sir, Mrs. Carter is... I don't give a damn what Mrs. Carter is. I want to see what kind of female has been eating my flour and burning my firewood for 3 weeks without my say-so. Bring her out. Evelyn walked out of the kitchen. She walked to the head of the table and stood at Jack's right shoulder and folded her hands in her apron, and Whitaker turned to look at her, and she did not lower her eyes. Mr. Whitaker. And who in God's name are you? Evelyn Carter, sir. I cook for the men. You cook for my men. For the men of Silver Creek, sir. Yes. And who said you could? Mr. Turner, sir. And what do I pay you? She paused half a beat. $3 a week, sir, and my room and board. You don't pay her, Whitaker. That was Jack. He had stood up. He had stood up on cracked ribs, and he was holding the back of his chair with one hand, because he had to, and Evelyn saw Hugh Murphy's hand go very slow to the edge of the table and curl around it. Beg your pardon, Turner. You don't pay her. I pay her. Out of my own wages. There ain't a penny of yours gone to her, and there won't be. Out of your wages? Yes, sir. For 3 weeks. Yes, sir. Whitaker laughed. It was not a laugh that had any pleasure in it. Turner, you damned fool. You hired a woman with your own money to feed my men, and you didn't think I'd notice. I thought you wouldn't care, sir, so long as the men were fed and the work got done. The work? Yes, sir. Turner, the work has gone to hell. I have it on paper. Murphy's letters to me these last 6 months read like a man writing his own obituary. The bridge over the creek is a disgrace. The east fence is down. The hay barn roof leaks in 3 places. I came up here to tell you I'm selling. I'm selling the whole damn outfit to the Northern Pacific Land Office for the railroad spur, and I'm doing it inside the month, and you and your 15 men and your $3 a week widow can find work elsewhere. The dining room went silent, the way a room goes silent when a man pulls a gun. You're selling Silver Creek. That's what I said. To the railroad. For more money than you'll see in your lifetime, Turner. Mr. Whitaker, there's been a Turner foreman on this ranch since before there was a railroad in the territory. My daddy broke this ground for your daddy. We rode for your brand for 31 years between us. And I'm grateful, Turner. I'll write you a letter of reference. Sir, don't sir me. Mr. Whitaker, you sell this ranch to the railroad and they'll run cattle off it inside a year. They'll cut the timber off the ridge, and they'll dam the creek, and they'll put a roundhouse on the south range, and there won't be a cow on it, nor a horse on it, nor a man on it that knows how to work it. You'll be selling 100 years of country for a check that won't cash for 2. Turner. And these men, sir, these men have been with me through 3 winters and a drought and a cattle plague that took half the herd, and they have not missed a day's work between them, and they have not asked you for a raise, nor a soft chair, nor a Sunday off, and you're going to tell them this morning, with the mud of last night's storm still on their boots, that they're done. Turner. I will not be lectured by my own foreman in front of my own table. You don't have a table no more, Mr. Whitaker. You sold it. The room did not move. Whitaker's face went the color of milk left out. What did you say to me? I said you don't have a table here no more. You sold it. You sold it the minute you walked through that door and called Tom McKinney a cripple in front of the man who set his bone, and you sold it twice when you called Mrs. Carter a female like she was a heifer at auction, and you sold it 3 times when you told 15 good men you'd run them off this ground for a railroad check. You're done here, Mr. Whitaker. You ride out today, and you don't ride back in. Turner. You are dismissed. Yes, sir. I figured I would be. Get off my property. It ain't your property after today. What did you say? Jack let go of the chair. He stood up the rest of the way on his own. He put his hat on his head. I said it ain't your property after today, sir, because I am buying it from you. Hugh Murphy's hand on the table went tight. Evelyn did not breathe. You are buying it. Yes, sir. With what, Turner? With every dollar I have saved in 22 years of riding for your brand. With my daddy's land in Kansas that I never sold. With a note on the cattle and a note on my own back, if it comes to it. I will pay you what the railroad will pay you, sir. And I will pay you in cash by the end of the month, and you will sign Silver Creek over to me, and you will ride out of here, and you will not come back. You don't have that money, Turner. I will have it. You will not. I will, sir. And if you don't? Jack didn't answer. Evelyn turned her head and looked at him. He was looking back at her. If I don't, Mr. Whitaker, then you sell to the railroad, and I ride out with the men, and we go where men like us go when there's no ground left to stand on. But you will give me until the end of the month. Because you owe me that, sir. After 31 years between my daddy and me, you owe me 30 days. Whitaker stared at him. Whitaker stared at Hugh Murphy, whose hand had not moved from the edge of the table. Whitaker stared at Tom McKinney, who had gotten to his feet somehow, and was standing in the bunkhouse door with his good hand on the jamb. Whitaker stared at 15 men who had not moved, nor spoken, nor blinked, and who were not going to. He stared last at Evelyn. She did not lower her eyes. 30 days, Turner. Yes, sir. Not 31. No, sir. And the woman goes. The woman stays, Mr. Whitaker. What did you say? I said the woman stays. She is not your business. She was never your business. She is mine. Whitaker put his hat on. He went down the porch steps. He got in his buggy. He drove away, and not one man at the table moved until the sound of the wheels was gone past the gate. Then Hugh Murphy let go of the table edge, and he put both his hands flat against the wood, and he said very quiet, "Sweet Christ, Jack." And Jack, still standing, still holding nothing, looked at Evelyn, and Evelyn looked at Jack, and the whole long room understood at once what had been said, and what had not been said, and what the next 30 days were going to cost. The buggy was barely out of sight when Hugh Murphy stood up. Jack? Hugh. You got savings. Some. How much? 1,800, maybe 19. And the Kansas land. Worth 4,000 on a good day, 3 on a bad. And what's Whitaker asking? He didn't say. The railroads offered him 22. The room went still. 22,000, Cal said. That's right. Jack, you ain't got 22,000. I know I ain't, Cal. Hugh sat back down. He put his elbows on the table. He looked around the long row of faces. Boys, 15 pairs of eyes came to him. I got $640 in a tin under my bunk. Saved over 11 years. I was gonna buy a place in Idaho when I got too old to ride. I ain't gonna ride to Idaho. The money's Jack's. Hugh. Shut up, Jack. McKinney. Hugh. How much? 212. It's all I got. It's Jack's. Yes, sir. Cal. Hugh, I ain't got but $90. It's Jack's. Yes, sir. It went around the table. Ezra had $11 saved from a year of wages. The man with the long mustache had $400. The two brothers from Wyoming had $300 between them. By the time Hugh got to the last man at the table, they had counted up to $2,743 in saved wages, and Jack was sitting at the head of the table with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the wood, and he was not crying, but he was not far from it either. That's still not enough, boys. It's a start, Jack. It ain't enough, Hugh? Then we'll find the rest. Where? I don't know yet, Jack, but we'll find it. Evelyn had not sat down. She was still standing at Jack's right shoulder, and she had been listening, and now she put her hand on the back of his chair. Jack? Evelyn, where are the books? What books? The ranch books, the ledgers. Hardy kept them. Where are they? Cal looked up. They're in the office, ma'am, the little room behind the parlor. Hardy used to do the figures every Sunday afternoon. Has anyone touched them since he left? No, ma'am. Nobody knows the figures but Hardy. And Mr. Whitaker. Yes, ma'am, and Mr. Whitaker. Bring them to me. Jack looked up. Evelyn, what are you doing? My husband was a dry goods merchant on Olive Street, Jack. I kept his books for 9 years. I know how a ledger reads. I want to know what Mr. Whitaker has been telling himself about Silver Creek for the last 10 years. Evelyn, that ain't gonna change. You don't know what it's going to change, Jack. Bring me the books. Cal brought them. He brought a stack 2 feet high and set them on the kitchen table, and Evelyn sat down with the lamp at her elbow and a clean sheet of paper and the stub of a pencil, and she did not stop until well past dark. Jack came in at full night. He stood in the doorway. Evelyn. Jack. You've been at it 11 hours. I know. You've ate nothing. I know that too. Evelyn. Jack, sit down. I want to ask you something. He sat. She turned the topmost ledger so he could see it, and she ran her finger down a column of numbers. This is the operating account for Silver Creek for the last fiscal year. Total income from cattle sold at the Bozeman yards, $9,400. Operating costs, feed, wages, equipment, taxes, $4,100. Net profit to the ranch, $5,300. All right. Now, this is the personal account ledger, the one Hardy kept for Mr. Whitaker's draws. Yes. Mr. Whitaker drew $6,200 against the ranch last year, Jack. He drew more than the ranch made. He always does. How? What do you mean, how? How does a ranch that nets $5,300 pay $6,200 to its owner? Where does the difference come from? Jack looked at her. I never asked Evelyn. He's the owner. I'm asking Jack. She turned another page. She had a slip of paper marking it. He's been borrowing against the ranch. There's a note here dated November of last year for $4,000 from the Helena Land and Trust Bank, secured by the deed to Silver Creek. There's another one from 2 years ago for $3,000. There's a third from 4 years ago for $2,500. The earliest one I found is from 1872, $6,000. Evelyn. Jack, Mr. Whitaker has borrowed against this ranch 4 times in 8 years. Total notes outstanding by my count $13,000. 13. Plus interest. The current balance due, if I'm reading these statements correctly, is closer to 16. Jack sat very still. He told me he was selling for 22. Yes. And he owes 16 on it. Yes. So he walks away with 6. If the railroad pays cash, less if they don't. And if I buy it, then you owe 16, Jack. Whoever buys it owes 16 because the notes are on the deed. The bank gets paid first. Evelyn. Jack, I'm not done. There's more. There's more. She turned another ledger. She had 3 pages marked. Mr. Whitaker has been riding the railroad for 2 years, Jack. The letters are filed in the back of this book. He's been negotiating the sale since the spring of '78. The price the railroad first offered him was $31,000. He turned it down. They came back at 26. He turned it down. They settled at 22 last month. Why would a man turn down $31,000 and settle for 22? I don't know. Because he doesn't own the ranch outright, Jack. The original deed of 1862 lists 2 names on it, his and his brother's. His brother, Edmund Whitaker, the man's brother. There's a clause in the deed, I have it underlined here, that says neither party can sell the property without the written consent of the other. The brother died in 1869. The deed should have gone through probate. There is no probate paper in this book, Jack. There is no record that the brother's half ever passed legally to Mr. Whitaker. Not in this ledger. And if it had, there would be. Evelyn. He doesn't own the half he's selling, Jack. He's been borrowing on a deed that isn't fully his, and he's been hiding it from the bank by paying down the interest with the operating profits, and he's selling to the railroad at 22 because the railroad's lawyers haven't found it yet, but at 31 they would have. Jack put his hands flat on the table. Evelyn. Jack. You're telling me Mr. Whitaker is committing a fraud. I'm telling you, Jack, that any judge in the territory looking at these books for half an hour would see what I have seen in 11 hours, and that Mr. Whitaker knows it, and that is why he came up here this morning. He came up here to push the sale through fast, before anyone could open these books. And the woman. Yes. He saw the woman, and the woman could read. Yes. Sweet Christ, Evelyn. There's something else. There's more. Jack, the brother, Edmund Whitaker, he had a daughter. Jack went still. A daughter. There's a letter in the back of this book from a Margaret Whitaker of Sacramento, California, dated the spring of 1875. She is asking Mr. Whitaker about her father's estate. She is asking Jack where her share of Silver Creek has gone. There is no answering letter. There are 3 more letters from her over the next 2 years. None of them answered. The last one is from 1877. She says she has retained an attorney. And that's the last letter, Jack. There is nothing after it. He paid her off. Or he made her go away some other way. Or she gave up. Or she's still looking. I don't know. But she exists, Jack. And she has a claim that hasn't been settled. Jack sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the lamp and did not say anything for a long time. Evelyn. Yes, Jack. If a man brought this to a court, then Mr. Whitaker doesn't sell to anybody. The deed gets frozen until Margaret Whitaker is found and her share settled. The railroad walks away because the railroad doesn't buy land that's in dispute. The bank's notes have to be addressed because the deed they're secured against is a deed that wasn't whole. Mr. Whitaker. Jack. Mr. Whitaker may not have a ranch to sell at all. And me. You go to Margaret Whitaker. You find her. You tell her the truth. You buy her share for what it's worth, not what her uncle valued it at when he was hiding it from her, but what it is, half of an honest ranch in Montana. And you settle her uncle's notes with the bank, and you take this place free and clear. You don't pay 22. You don't pay 16. You pay her what's right, and you pay the bank what's owed, and you walk away with the ranch and your conscience both. Evelyn. Yes. How much would that be? I don't know, Jack. $8,000 for the bank after we negotiate. Maybe $4,000 to Margaret Whitaker fair value of her half. 12 total. We have $2,700. You have $2,700 from the men. Hugh said he had $640. And you have your Kansas land. And you have a story, Jack, that any honest banker in Helena would lend against once he saw these books. Because no banker wants to be the one who lent on a fraud. Evelyn? Yes, Jack. You are something else. I'm just a woman who kept her husband's books, Jack. You ain't just anything, Evelyn. She didn't answer that. She closed the ledger. She set both her hands on top of it, and she looked at him across the lamp, and the kitchen was very quiet. Jack. Evelyn. There's one more thing. Tell me. I want to ride to Helena tomorrow. With Hugh if he'll come. I want to take these books to a lawyer named Coleman who used to handle my father's affairs. He'll be old now, but he'll be alive. He'll know what to do. And I want to send a wire from Helena to Sacramento to the postmaster asking for any record of Margaret Whittaker. We start there. We have the books. We have the letters. We have everything we need to make Mr. Whittaker stop Jack, and we can be gone by sunrise. Evelyn? Yes, you'd do that. I would, Jack? Why? She looked at him. You know why. He didn't speak for a long count. Evelyn Carter. Jack, you are going to ride to Helena with Hugh in the morning, and when you come back, this place is going to be ours, yours and mine and these men's. And I am going to ask you something on that porch out there that I do not have the right to ask you tonight, because I have not earned it tonight. But I will earn it. By the time you ride back through that gate, Evelyn, I will have earned the right to ask it. She put her hand on top of his on the ledger, and she did not move it. Jack? Yes. Ask me when I ride back. Don't ask me before. No, ma'am. And Jack? Yes. Don't call me ma'am. No, Evelyn. She rode out at sunup with Hugh Murphy beside her on the bay mare, and the ledgers wrapped in oilcloth across the saddle bow, and Jack stood on the porch of the ranch house with his hat in his hand and watched her go down the road until the bend took her out of sight, and Cal came out and stood next to him without speaking. And after a long time, Cal said, Jack. Cal, you gonna marry that woman? If she'll have me. She'll have you, Jack. Cal, you don't know that. Jack, I've been watching her watch you for 4 days. She'll have you. Jack didn't answer. He put his hat on his head. He walked down off the porch. He went to the corral and saddled his own horse because there was work to be done, and a man with cracked ribs could ride if he had to. And there was a fence on the East Range that was not going to mend itself. 3 days later, they came back. Hugh was first through the gate, and Evelyn was right behind him, and the ledgers were still in the oilcloth, and there was a second man on a third horse riding with them. He was a little man in a black suit with spectacles and a leather case, and he sat his horse like a man who had not sat one often. Cal, Hugh called from the gate. Hugh! Get Jack. Jack's on the South Range. Then ride and fetch him. Tell him Mr. Coleman from Helena is here, and tell him to bring his wits with him. Cal rode. Mr. Coleman dismounted slowly. He looked older than Evelyn remembered, but his eyes were the same, and he tipped his hat to her as she dismounted beside him. Mrs. Carter. Mr. Coleman, your father would be very proud of you. Thank you, sir. Now, where is the foreman? Jack came in at a hard gallop 20 minutes later. He swung down before the horse had fully stopped, and he held his side with one hand because his ribs had not forgiven him yet, and he came up the porch steps 2 at a time. Evelyn? Jack? Tell me. Mr. Coleman. The little lawyer set his leather case on the porch boards. He opened it. He produced a single sheet of paper folded once and handed it to Jack. What's this? Read it, Mr. Turner. Jack read it. His lips moved over the words. He read it again. He looked up. This is from Margaret Whittaker, Miss Margaret Whittaker of Sacramento. We received a wire reply within 36 hours. Mrs. Carter's instinct was correct. Miss Whittaker has been searching for her uncle's whereabouts for 9 years. She retained counsel in 1877, but the firm was too small to pursue a Montana matter. She has been waiting Mr. Turner for someone to find her. She has authorized me by wire to act on her behalf. She will sell her interest in Silver Creek for $3,500 cash on condition that her uncle Mr. Whittaker is informed in writing of her existence and the fraud against her, and that he sign a quitclaim deed acknowledging that he has held her half in trust without authority for 9 years. Mr. Coleman? Yes, Mr. Turner. That ain't $22,000. No, Mr. Turner. And the bank? The bank, Mr. Turner, is a different conversation. I had that conversation yesterday with the senior officer of the Helena Land and Trust. He was, shall we say, alarmed by the information Mrs. Carter and I brought him. The notes against Silver Creek have been called by the bank as of yesterday afternoon. Mr. Whittaker has been notified. The total payable is $15,892. The bank has agreed, in light of the irregularities in the original collateral, to discount the notes to $9,000 cash payable within 90 days to whatever buyer takes clear title from the heirs. $9,000. Yes, Mr. Turner. And $3,500 to the niece. Yes. $12,500 total. Yes, Mr. Turner. Mr. Coleman. Yes. I have $2,700 from my men. I have the better part of $1,900 saved myself. I have a section of land in Kansas worth $3,000 on a slow day. That's $7,600. I am $5,000 short. Coleman opened his case again. He took out a second paper. Mr. Turner, I have been a friend to the Carter family for 34 years. I delivered Mrs. Carter at her father's house in 1849. I stood up at her wedding in 1873. I am, as it happens, in the position to extend a personal loan secured by the property of $5,000 at 4% payable over 10 years. Mr. Coleman, it is not charity, Mr. Turner. I will be repaid with interest, but I will be repaid by you and by Mrs. Carter and by these men, and I will sleep better at night for it. Jack looked at the paper. He looked at Coleman. He looked at Evelyn. Evelyn. Jack. You did this. Mr. Coleman did this, Jack. Evelyn Carter, you did this. She didn't answer. He stepped to her. He took his hat off. He went down on one knee on the porch boards in front of 15 men and a lawyer from Helena, and a foreman with cracked ribs, and a widow who had ridden 3 days with a bag of ledgers and a bay mare, and he took her hand. Evelyn. Jack. On that porch I told you I'd ask you something when you rode back. I'm asking you now. Stay. Not as a cook. Not as a hand. Not for $3 a week and your room and board. Stay as my wife. Stay as the woman who built this ranch with me and the men out yonder, and stay till they put us both in the ground out behind the smithy. She looked at him a long time. Jack. Evelyn. Stand up off that porch. Ma'am. Stand up. I am not going to answer a man who is on his knees. Stand up and ask me on your feet. He stood up. Evelyn Carter. Yes, Jack. Will you marry me? Yes, Jack. Hugh Murphy let out a sound that was not quite a yell and not quite a sob, and Cal threw his hat in the air and didn't catch it. And Tom McKinney came out of the bunkhouse with his arm in the sling and his eyes wet. And Mr. Coleman from Helena took out a clean handkerchief and wiped his glasses. And Evelyn Carter, who 6 days ago had knelt in the dust of that same porch with a wedding ring in her fist and begged for a roof, stood beside the man she had chosen, and looked out across the yard at the men who had become her people, and she did not cry because she had not cried once in 3 months, and she was not going to start now. Mr. Coleman opened his leather case one more time on the porch boards and laid out 3 documents with the calm precision of a man who had spent 40 years closing other people's troubles. And he had Jack sign 1, and Evelyn sign 2, and Hugh Murphy witness all 3. And by the time the ink was dry on the last page, Hugh had already saddled a fresh horse to ride to Bozeman with the wire to Sacramento. Hugh. Jack. Ride careful. I'll ride how I ride. Hugh. I know, Jack. Don't say it twice. He rode out at 4 o'clock with the sun still high enough to give him daylight halfway down the road, and Cal stood next to Jack on the porch and shook his head slow. Jack. Cal. That man is the meanest old cuss I ever rode with. He is. And he just rode 40 miles to send a wire on his own time for a deal he ain't gonna see a dime of. He is. On account of her. On account of all of us, Cal. Jack, on account of her. Jack didn't argue. Whitaker came back 2 days later in a different buggy with a different driver and a face the color of curdled milk. He had a lawyer with him this time, a sweating fat man from Bozeman in a frock coat that did not fit him, and the 2 of them came up the porch steps, and Whitaker did not take off his hat. Mr. Coleman was sitting in the rocking chair on the porch reading a book. Mr. Whitaker. Who in the hell are you? Coleman Helena, counsel for the heirs of Edmund Whitaker, deceased of Sacramento, California. The Bozeman lawyer made a sound like a man who had stepped into something he could not get off his boot. Whitaker said, Now you listen to me. No, sir, Coleman said, and he closed his book and he set it on the porch rail. "You will listen to me. The Helena Land and Trust has called your notes. Your buyer, the Northern Pacific Land Office, has been informed of the cloud on your title. Miss Margaret Whitaker has been located and has retained me as her counsel and authorized me to settle her interest with the present occupant of the property at fair market value, which we have done. Your sale to the railroad is canceled. Your debt to the bank is yours alone. Your fraud against your niece is a matter we are prepared to address in court if you compel us to. Or, sir, you may sign these papers acknowledging that you have held her half in trust without authority since 1869, and we will accept your signature in lieu of a criminal complaint, and you will ride out of this country and you will not come back. Those are the only two options I am authorized to offer you. I will give you 10 minutes to choose." The Bozeman lawyer leaned over and whispered something in Whitaker's ear. Whitaker said nothing. The lawyer whispered again, longer. Whitaker took the pen Coleman handed him and signed the papers on the porch rail without sitting down. He did not look at Jack. He did not look at Evelyn standing in the doorway. He did not look at Hugh Murphy leaning against the post with one hand resting easy on the butt of his sidearm. He got back in his buggy. He rode out, and that was the end of the man who had owned Silver Creek for 17 years and sold his own dead brother's daughter for a bank loan 4 times. Hugh spat off the porch as the buggy went out the gate. "Jack." "Hugh, tell me I get to be the one rides into Bozeman next month and tells the bank manager what kind of man he was lending to." "You can be the one, Hugh." "I'm gonna enjoy it." "I know you are." They were married 3 weeks later in the parlor of the ranch house by a circuit preacher who had ridden up from Livingston for the occasion. Evelyn wore a dark brown frontier dress with her hair pinned up plain, and Jack wore a clean shirt and his good vest and a pair of boots Cal had polished without being asked. Hugh Murphy stood up beside Jack as his witness. An older woman from the Bozeman boarding house where Evelyn had stayed on her ride to Helena had come up the road 3 days before to be hers. Tom McKinney sat in the front row with his arm out of the sling for the first time, and Ezra cried through the whole ceremony and was not teased for it, not once, not even by Cal. Jack slid a plain silver ring onto her finger. "Evelyn." "Jack." "In sickness and in health." "In sickness and in health." "Till the dirt takes us both." "Till the dirt, Jack." The preacher said the words the preacher always said. Hugh Murphy said amen so loud he startled the dog under the table. The men carried the long supper table out of the dining room and into the yard, and laid it end to end with 3 more they had borrowed from the neighbors, and Evelyn cooked her own wedding supper because she would not let anybody else, and 17 people sat down to eat at sundown, and the food ran out before the talk did, and that was a sign Hugh said of a marriage that was going to take. The first year was hard. The bank notes came due in pieces. The Kansas land sold for $2,800 less than they had hoped. Coleman's loan held. Margaret Whitaker received her $3,500 and wrote a single letter back, brief and dignified, saying only that she had not believed she would live to see the day, and that she hoped the new owners would do right by the ground her father had loved. Evelyn pinned the letter on the kitchen wall above the stove, and it stayed there. The cattle drive that fall brought in $11,000 at the Bozeman yards because Hugh had pushed the herd hard through the high passes and had not lost a single head, which had not been done in the territory in 11 years. Jack paid the bank the second installment, and Coleman the first, and the men their back wages, and there was money left over to put a new roof on the hay barn before winter. Tom McKinney's arm healed crooked, but it healed. He could throw a rope by Christmas. By spring he could rope a calf at 20 paces with his offhand, and he taught Ezra to do the same, and Ezra grew 6 inches between 16 and 17 and started shaving and stopped crying at weddings and asked a girl from the next valley to a barn dance and was turned down and lived through it. In the second year, they bought the section of land north of the creek that backed onto the timber ridge, and Hugh built himself a cabin on it because Hugh had decided he was not going to Idaho after all. And he was not going to live in the bunkhouse forever either, and he was 46 years old and had never had a roof of his own. He cut every log in that cabin himself, with Cal helping on the heavy ends. He moved in on the first day of October. Evelyn brought him a quilt she had pieced over the summer, and a Dutch oven and a tin of coffee. And Hugh stood in the doorway of his own house and could not speak for a full minute. And then he said, "Mrs. Turner." And she said, "Hugh." And that was all that was said. In the 3rd year their daughter was born. She came in March on a night with snow on the ground, and Tom McKinney's wife, who had been a midwife in Tennessee like his mother before her in the kitchen with hot water and clean linen. The baby came hard. Evelyn was 31, and it was her first child, and she had buried a husband 3 years before any of this. And she had told Jack in the first week of carrying that she was afraid, and Jack had said, "I know Evelyn," and had said no more than that, because he had buried people too. And he knew that some fears do not go away when they are spoken to, only when they are walked through. She walked through this one. The girl came out red and screaming, and Tom's wife held her up and said, "She's whole. Mrs. Turner, she's whole." And Evelyn laughed and cried at the same time, and Jack came in from the porch where he had been pacing for 9 hours with Hugh and Cal and Ezra, all pretending to play cards with him, and he held his daughter and looked at his wife and said, "Evelyn." "Jack." "What's her name?" "Margaret." "Margaret. Margaret Hardy Turner." "Hardy. For the man whose chair I sat in." Jack didn't say anything for a moment. "Evelyn?" "Yes. That's a good name." "I know." He held the girl in the curl of his arm and looked down at her, and did not cry, but his hand on Evelyn's shoulder was tighter than it had any business being for a man who was not crying. Margaret Whitaker in Sacramento received the photograph and the letter Evelyn sent her in the 2nd month after the baby was born, and she wrote back with a small carved silver rattle that had been her own as a child, and a note that said only, "For the daughter of the woman who found me." The rattle hung from the cradle for 2 years, and then was put away in the cedar chest with the wedding dress and the letter from the cousin in Bozeman who had received Evelyn's news at last, and had written a long apologetic letter saying she had assumed Evelyn had not made it to Montana at all. That letter went in the cedar chest too, but unanswered. By the 5th year, Silver Creek was running 1,400 head of cattle, and was solvent, and had paid off Coleman's loan, and was widely understood across 3 counties to be the best-run outfit between Helena and the Yellowstone. Jack hired 2 new men. Evelyn cooked breakfast for 19 now, plus the baby, plus the second one on the way, and she had a girl from the next valley who came in to help with the heavy washing, and Cal had built her a proper pantry off the kitchen, with a window in it, and the kitchen window in the spring let in the smell of the cottonwoods down by the creek. She still sat at the foot of the table at supper. She still sat in Hardy's chair. She had told Jack once in the 2nd year that she did not want to move to the head of the table, even though she could have, even though it would have been proper for the rancher's wife. She told him she had earned the seat she had, and she would not give it up for a better one. Jack had looked at her across the kitchen and had not argued, because Jack had stopped arguing with her about most things, by then having learned in the 1st year of marriage what kind of woman he had married, and that she did not require argument from him, only honesty. In the 7th year, a man rode up the road from the rail siding with a leather satchel and a letter from the Northern Pacific Land Office offering $38,000 for Silver Creek and the surrounding sections. He was a polite man. He sat in the parlor and drank coffee. Evelyn poured for him, and he made his case, and he laid the offer on the table. Jack looked at it. Jack pushed it back across the table. "Sir." Jack said, "This ranch ain't for sale." "Mr. Turner, it wasn't for sale at 22 when your company tried to buy it the first time. It wasn't for sale at 31 before that. It ain't for sale at 38. It ain't gonna be for sale next year, nor the year after. You can take that back to your office in St. Paul, and you can write it down in pencil." "Mr. Turner, may I ask why?" "You can ask, sir." "Then I'm asking." Jack looked at Evelyn, who was sitting across the room with the second baby on her hip. Evelyn looked back at him. "Sir," Jack said, "there was a woman who came up that road 8 years ago with nothing in her hands but a wedding ring she was about to pawn for stage fare she didn't have. She knelt down on this porch and asked for a place to stay. We gave her a week to prove she could feed 15 men, and she did it, and she stayed. And she found out the man who owned this ranch had been cheating his own dead brother's daughter for 9 years. And she rode 3 days to Helena with the proof of it in a saddlebag. And she came back with a way to save this place that nobody else in the territory could have figured out. Mr. Turner, I ain't done, sir. That woman is sitting right there. She is my wife. Every fence post on this property has her hands on it. Every meal that's served in that dining room across the hall has come from her stove. Every man that rides for this brand rode for her first and would die before they let her down. This ain't a ranch you can buy, sir, because this ain't a ranch. It is what we made out of what was left when honest men stopped letting a thief like Whitaker tell them what their lives was worth. Do you understand me? The man from the Northern Pacific looked at Jack. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at the silver rattle hanging from the chair where the older girl was playing on the floor. He stood up. He put his hat on. Mr. Turner, Mrs. Turner, I won't trouble you again. I'd be obliged. He rode out. They watched him go down the road from the porch, the same porch where Evelyn had knelt 8 years before in the dust, the same boards, the same view of the gate, and Jack put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned her head against him, and they did not speak for a long time. Jack. Evelyn. Hugh's coming up for supper. He always is. Cal said he'd bring the twins. Cal always does. Tom and Mary said they'd come Sunday. Sunday's fine. Jack. Evelyn. We have everything. We do. Everything. I know it, Evelyn. And it started on this porch. I know that too. She did not move from under his arm. The older girl came running from the parlor with the rattle in her fist, calling for her father. And Jack picked her up with his free arm and held her against his hip. And the baby on Evelyn's other side reached for her sister. And the four of them stood on the porch with the spring sun coming down on them and the cottonwoods bright down by the creek. And Hugh Murphy was already coming up the road on his bay mare with a string of fish for supper because he had been out at the creek since dawn. Evelyn Carter. Turner had walked up that road 8 years ago on broken shoes with 3 months of widowhood on her shoulders and a wedding ring she had meant to sell for a stage ticket that would not have taken her anywhere worth going. She had knelt on those porch boards in the dust and begged a stranger for a roof over her head. She had been given 1 week and a brutal rule and a chair at the foot of a table in a house that did not love her yet. And she had earned in 7 days and the 7 years that followed a name and a husband and 2 daughters and a community that would have ridden through fire for her and a ranch that was hers and her family's and her men's and would still be theirs when her grandchildren were old, and she had done it without softening 1 inch of who she was, and she had done it without asking any man to save her, and she had done it without ever once again, in all the days of her life, kneeling in the dust of any porch for any reason. She had walked up that road with nothing. She had built everything. And on the day a man from a company in St. Paul rode 40 miles to offer her $38,000 for the place she had built. She stood on her own porch with her husband's arm around her shoulders and her daughters at her sides, and the men who had become her people coming up the road for supper, and she sent him home. Because some things, once you have earned them, are not for sale.